It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
What's the right time for a book like that? I mean, it's sat there for a couple of years. How do you know when it's the right time?
Well, I decided I
some
needed
violence and some raunch in my life. It's the right time.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson, the founder, the very tired and over kids founder of happyfamilies.com.au. I'm laughing, Kylie, because of what happened this morning in the kids' room with the Google clock. So at Christmas time, one of the kids got a clock, right? And it's a Google clock, which means that it's got a speaker in it and they can say, hey, Google, do whatever, and it does stuff. But we had a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old that were mad at each other this morning. Why don't you say what happened? Because you were the one that actually walked into the room because I couldn't bring myself to do it.
Google, turn on the music. And then 3 seconds later, the 15-year-old, Google, turn the music off. Over and over again.
And so it would start and then it would stop every 3 seconds. Oh, my goodness. Why? Just why? Anyway, today we're going to have a break from parenting on the podcast. Once a month, we do book club. It's the third Thursday of every month. We talk about what we're reading. We give you a chance to, I mean, there's something wonderful about books. Apparently they increase our empathy. They help us to see the world through other people's eyes. You know what?
Well, it's not working because our girls read like you wouldn't believe.
It's not working for me either, I got to tell you. But they do at least give us a sense of escape. Maybe that's why our kids do read so much. It gives them a chance to get away from each other.
Oh, is that why you read so much?
Yeah, I try. I really do try. So today it's the opportunity for us to, like I said, dive into the stuff that we're reading and share what's, I guess, lighting us up or what's not. And there's always a problem when we do book club because you, Mrs. Happy Families, don't seem to understand what it means to talk about one book. You want to tell the whole world about all of the books that you've been reading. So what have you been reading and what are we going to talk about? I will jump in after you.
Well, a couple of years ago, my sister actually gave me the entire Outlander series to read.
That's by
Diana Gabaldon.
Gabaldon. If Diana Gabaldon is listening to this podcast, I mean, I really hope she is, but I doubt it. I only know how to pronounce her name because I looked it up on the internet.
You cheated.
I did a quick cheat, and this is how it sounds.
My name's Diana Gabaldon. 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 Gabaldon.
Gabaldon.
Gabaldon. Anyway, go on. Now that we know.
So it's been sitting in my cupboard for a couple of years.
Yep.
And they are big, chunky, heavy-duty books.
And the books launched the series that is on Netflix and a handful of other streaming platforms that, from what I understand, is very violent and a little bit raunchy as well.
It is. So with questionable themes, I have been just kind of waiting for the right time.
Well, what's the right time? What's the right time for a book like that? I mean, it's sat there for a couple of years. Well, how do you know when it's the right time?
Well, I decided I
needed
needed
some violence and some raunch in my life. It's the right time.
No, I decided that I was going to allow myself the luxury of reading a big book instead of trying to do one in 2 days.
So these books have been in your wardrobe for, like you said, like 2 or 3 years now.
Yeah.
How many? There's like 7 of them?
Yeah.
Is that right? 7?
Yeah.
I was a guess, yes? And so you've been, how far in are you?
I've read the first one.
Right. And was it as provocative as the series is supposed to be?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, definitely.
Really?
So
Okay.
sensitive ears, sensitive eyes might want to stay clear of it.
Yeah, okay.
And
what about sensitive souls? Because, like, it's violent, right? There's some horrible
it
stuff
is,
in there.
but I don't think it's a justification. It's one thing to read something. It's another thing to watch it.
Right.
And when we read things that are uncomfortable, we kind of gloss over them. It's really easy for us to gloss over them. When we watch it, outside of turning it off, you can't actually get rid of that picture.
It's like that you can't unsee this kind of thing.
Yeah. So you can kind of read something and you're aware that it's happening, but you don't allow your mind to dwell on it. You don't actually allow your mind to create the picture to go with that part of the story.
I think I can relate. I remember years ago reading The Hunger Games and going, oh, it's pretty full on from a themes perspective. But you're not actually watching people go out there and slay one another so that they can win this prize. Whereas watching the movie, I was really put off with The Hunger Games by the movies. I was like, it's it's one thing to read it, it's another thing to watch it. It's such an assault on all of the senses. It changes. So I get that. So anyway, you're reading Outlander by
Diana Gabaldon.
How do you rate it?
Look, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's such a out of this world experience. You know,
Is it like it's historically accurate, right? It's a pretty historical kind of thing.
Yeah. There's huge historical information in it, but obviously a lot of fiction.
Sure, yeah. So historical fiction
flows through it, and so I'm fascinated by history in so many ways, and appalled and just drawn in by the way life was and the choices and the justifications for choices that were made in a different era and time.
Yeah, right.
So I really enjoyed it. It's going to take me probably the next 6 months to get around to reading the next book.
Oh, okay, all right. So it's going to take you 3 more years to get to
so.
number 7.
So it's a really dense read.
Yeah.
It's a very dense read, very small print, and about 600 pages.
Wow.
So it's a solid read.
Should I read it?
I actually think you'd really enjoy it.
Okay. Well, I've got a stack of 35 books on my bookshelf right now, but I'll read it once
It's mentally challenging.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So if you're open to kind of branching out and reading something that's going to challenge you in lots of areas, then I'd definitely suggest Outlander is a good book.
What would you rate it out of 5?
Probably 4.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good score.
It was a good book.
Okay. All right, cool.
It was a good book.
You're looking at your paperwork like you've got more to talk about. You don't get to talk about all the books that you've read.
Okay, I won't.
Now, you can't say that and then not talk about them because I feel like you really want to. What else have you got on the list?
Well, at the
What else have
beginning
you
of the
read?
year, I decided to sign up to Beck Sparrow's book club.
Oh, yeah, books with Beck and Jane, Birds of a Feather.
Birds of a Feather. I'm really enjoying discovering new reads and just, I guess, branching out.
Yeah.
So I've started doing that. I actually missed the first book club.
All right. Did you read the book?
I did read the book and I was so excited to sit down because one of the great things that Beck and Jane do is they actually get the author on.
Oh, wow.
So you get to have a night with the author discussing the book and the choices that they made and, you know, the storyline and stuff. So I was really looking forward to it because I actually, this was I'm going to say quite a dark book.
Right. So what was it called? You haven't said it.
Oh, sorry. It's called The Soulmate by Sally Hepworth. She writes beautifully, and it was actually quite, I would say, an intricate read from the point of view that there's 4 main characters and each chapter is a different character kind of describing. It's actually not, they're not overlapping. It's not describing the same event. It's actually telling the story at different points in time by the different people.
Yeah, some novelists are so clever, aren't they?
Very, does my head in. I don't know how you would actually write a book like that, but she's done a fantastic job of piecing everything together to the point where I obviously had to keep reading. It only took me a couple of days.
Yep.
Very, very easy read. Like I said, definitely deals there's suicide, domestic violence issues dealt with. So it's a dark book.
Right.
And I guess just challenging the mindset of what it means to love and what lengths you'll go to prove that love. But if you're interested in kind of reading a book that's going to kind of stretch your reading capacity and being open to being challenged by what that looks like, then I would definitely recommend The Soulmate.
Score out of 5?
I'm going to go 3.5.
Do you have any more on the list that you've read this year that you want to talk about?
I have one that I'm halfway through at the moment, so I'm
save
going
it
to
for next
leave
month?
it for next month.
Okay, all right. So you're off to a much slower start reading-wise this year. Is it because of the kids fighting over the Google clock and the music going on and off? Is that?
No, it depends on the book matter. And the book that I'm reading at the moment that I'm halfway through is very dense and it's challenging me.
Okay.
So it doesn't...
Not to mention that Diana Gabaldon's book was...
that was a big read.
A big read as well. Okay, all right. I'm going to share my books of 2023 thus far.
It's the Happy Families podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. And if you've been waiting with bated breath to find out what Justin has been reading this month, he's about to tell us.
Okay, I'm going to get in trouble because you know how I gave you a hard time about having a long list and you only had 2.5 books on the list? I have 7 books on the list. So I'm going to go through them super fast and maybe I won't do them all. We'll just see. The first book I want to talk about, I finished early in the new year. I was reading it through December. Huge book by Jared Diamond called Guns, Germs and Steel. I've heard from so many people that this book is the one that must be read to understand the world. It's basically a short history of the last 16,000 years.
That doesn't sound very riveting at all.
It's absolutely incredible. So he reviews the history of migration, development, language, writing, domestication of food and animals, war, domination, and other forms of human progress since the last ice age. I said, I don't know how many, 13,000 years ago or whatever it was. And the theories that he proposes are just so compelling. The writing's engaging. The book's illuminating. I loved it, except it was really long. Like, we're talking, I don't know, 450, 500 pages, pretty dense. Getting through the last few chapters was pretty challenging. And a lot of what was in those chapters felt superfluous to me as a 2023 Westerner living the life that I live. But I can also see why he included them. I think by the time I got to page 400 of the 550 pages that it was, I felt like the story had been told and I'd had enough, and I was sort of dragged kicking and screaming towards the end of the book. But I'm giving it 4.5 out of 5. Guns, Germs and Steel. Oh, it's a compelling book. It's
Who was it by again?
Jared Diamond. And it's basically why did the American Indians and the South Americans, who were so popular, like millions and millions of them living on the South American and the North American continent, why did they not spread across the world and invade Europe and take over Europe? Why was it that the Europeans were the ones who dominated the world? And why did the Australian Aborigines not progress in terms of the tools and the social climate and cultural development? Why was it all so different? He talks about Papua New Guinea. He talks about Africa. I mean, it's a fascinating story, and the evidence that he leans on, I found just extraordinary. I loved the book. Next,
4.5.
4.5 out of 5. Yeah, really, really good book. I probably should make it 5, but it was just too long, and that's why I've deducted half a point. It was just too long.
Such a harsh critic.
The next one that I want to talk about, you know what? I'm not going to talk about it. I gave it 2.5 stars. It was based on, I'll mention it quickly, Ali Hazelwood. She wrote a book called The Love Hypothesis that I talked about this time last year.
Yep.
It's a rom-com sort of novel. This was
for a science geek.
Yeah. It was exactly the same as the last book. This one was called Love on the Brain. I hated it because I'd already read it last year, except it was a different book, but it was the same book. And I just didn't enjoy it, so I gave it 2.5. I also read a book, because I'm big on productivity and motivation and being awesome with life. And there's a brand new book that's making big waves in the sort of motivation world at the moment. It's called Get It Done by Ayelet Fishback. Really, really smart individual with some really great ideas. But the book was completely non-compelling. One of the most uninteresting and, I'm going to say, generally not even very original books on productivity and effectiveness that I've ever read. Just didn't love it. I gave it 2.5. Get it done. Should I just talk about the ones that I loved? Yeah, let's just do that, because I've got to wrap up. You're looking at me like I'm talking too long. Am I boring you?
A little.
Okay. I'm going to mention a book that was written in 1861 that I read a couple of weeks ago.
It's on my bookshelf now because you loved it so much. I have
so
to read
much.
it.
This is by George Eliot. So George Eliot is a pseudonym for a female writer, but the book is called Silas Marner. This book, I was actually unsure if I wanted to read it.
How did you even get it?
So it sat on my bookshelf, I reckon, for about 3 years. I bought it years ago, and I read a review somewhere when someone said, this is a brilliant 19th century book. Okay, written in 1861. You've got to read this.
So it's written in like proper English.
Oh, yeah, totally.
So Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. But I've got to say, my life is better because I read this book. It's a novel, and it tells the story of a set up and falsely accused weaver who leaves his town and becomes a recluse following this horrible incident. Silas Marner, I would say, is just sublimely written, and it's so intelligently written, and it's completely absorbing once you get over the language, because the 1861 language is a little bit tricky to get into, but the characters are well-rounded and so beautifully thought through, and the time and the place fit together so well, and Eliot's understanding of the psychology of the characters in the story is so deep and so rich. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. I
know that I
love
was
this book.
grateful that the book is only very, very little, because every waking minute you had spare, I would find you on the bed reading it.
Oh, it's beautiful. It really is. It's a compelling book. This weaver ends up with a child in the strangest of circumstances, and the child brings him out of being this horribly maligned recluse to being an integral part of the community, the lifeblood of the community. And it just, I thought it was so beautiful. It's not really about parenting, and yet it's so much about who we are as people and children. I just loved the book. I gave it 100%, like 5 stars. Great book. Silas Marner, George Eliot.
Well, I know that you've got a whole heap more that you want to talk about.
I want to keep on talking about them.
But considering you gave me such a hard time about the 2 books I talked about, we're going to call it quits.
Can I just mention them? Freely Determined by Ken and Sheldon, I gave it 4 out of 5. And That All Shall Be Saved, David Bentley Hart, I gave it 1 out of 5, and I only read 120 of the 200 pages, which is really weird because I always read everything. But George Eliot, Silas Marner, just read it. And Guns, Germs and Steel, if you want to really push yourself, great book.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what you read next month.
Oh, I'm reading
because
a book.
The pile next to your bed is not getting any smaller.
No, I promise you it is. I promise you it is getting smaller. I am reading a book right now that I cannot wait to talk about next month in book club. This is, I think, going to be my book of the year. So good.
Okay.
The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rule, and from Bridge Media, Craig Bruce is our executive producer. We'll chuck the books that we read into the show notes in case you want to get a little bit more clarity on what they were and what we were talking about. And of course, you can then just Google them and buy them. And we're not going to ask for any royalties or anything like that. Just go for it if you liked it. If you'd like more info about making your family happier, you can visit us at happyfamilies.com.au for all the info you need.